Hey, what's up everyone? This is Ursulon. Welcome back to my channel. It is Fitness Ministries. I want to do an expansion on what I talked about last time in the Sermon on the Mount, specifically Matthew chapter 5. I told you guys I'd come back to a verse, and so this is what I want to make this video about. And it's about heaven and earth. And I believe we see clear evidence that heaven and earth in this context is referring to the temple, the old covenant system, and I want to demonstrate that to you. Specifically, when we go over to Matthew chapter 5, I believe it's down in, Jesus says, in verse 35, he says, verse 34, I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And we see this repeated again in Matthew chapter 23. I told you Matthew 23 is really an expansion of this chapter, because in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus delivers a long scathing rebuke to the Pharisees and to that old covenant system. That's where you have all the woes. Woe to you, woe to you. And so I want to demonstrate now that heaven and earth, within this context, the footstool, are the old covenant, and specifically the temple system that we see here. We're going to find that if we go to Psalms 44, when Yahweh brought Israel out of Egypt, he was said to plant them just like a choice vine. And we see this over and over. It says in Psalms 44 verse 2, how you did drive out the heathen with your hand, you planted them, how you did afflict the people and cast them out. And so the people here were said to be planted, and we're going to see this in Isaiah 51, where God describes the planting of heaven and earth, and it's within the same context in verses 15 and 16. It says, but I am the Lord your God that divided the sea, whose waves roared. The Lord of hosts is his name. So we can see this, them coming out of Egypt, the division of the sea. He says, and I have put my words in your mouth. I have covered you in the shadow of my hand, that I may plant the heavens, lay the foundations of the earth. And this is the kicker, say to Zion, you are my people. So the planting of heaven and earth is synonymous with saying, Zion, you are my people. In verse 17, awake, awake, stand up, O Jerusalem. And so we see this perfect blend of Hebrew poetry, parallelism, that the planting of heaven and earth is synonymous with Jerusalem, Zion. Okay, if we go over to 1 Kings, and I think we have more evidence of this, 1 Kings chapter 8. Throughout the Old Testament, numerous times the people were said to pray to heaven. God would hear in his dwelling place. And so we see this numerous times in verse 12 and 13. Solomon has just built up the ark, and now they've brought in the ark, built up the temple, brought in the ark of the covenant. All the furniture is in place, the lampstand, the table of showbread, everything is perfectly situated. And now the presence of God is going to fill the temple. Then spake Solomon, the Lord said that he would dwell in the thick darkness. And so this is where the Yahweh himself is going to dwell in this temple. I have surely built you a house to dwell in, a settled place for you to abide in forever. And so here is Yahweh going to dwell in this temple. This is going to be his dwelling place. Now, if we scroll down, and there's numerous texts throughout this chapter that we could point to, but he says a prayer in verse 30. He's talking to the people, and he says, and hearken to the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel, when they shall pray toward this place, and you hear in heaven your dwelling place. Well, we just read in verse 12 and 13, the dwelling place was in the thick cloud in the temple, and it's being referred to as heaven here. And when you hear, forgive. And so this is repeated multiple times. Verse 32, then you hear in heaven, and do and judge your servants. We see this again in verse 43. It's, like I said, repeated numerous times. Verse 41, moreover, concerning a stranger that is not of your people Israel, but comes out of a far country for your name's sake, for they shall hear your great name, of your strong hand, of your stretched out arm, when he shall come and pray toward this house here in heaven, your dwelling place, and do all according to all that the stranger calls. So, and if we keep reading, that all people of the earth may know your name, to fear thee, to do as your people Israel, that they may know that this house, which I have builded, is called by your name. And so we have this repeating Hebrew parallelism, heaven, the house, the people would come, pray. God would hear from his dwelling place, and in heaven, which is in that temple, the black cloud. And so we see this numerous places. If we go back to Exodus 15, the Song of Moses, verse 17, we see a similar phrase here. God planting Israel after bringing them out. It says, you bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which you have made for you to dwell in the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. So the place where God would dwell, the heaven, is sanctuary. So I hope this is clear, because I think we've oftentimes overlooked what is right there jumping out at us off the page. Okay, I want to look at the throne of God now, and let's go over to Psalms 11. Excuse me. Got some notes here I'm looking at. Psalms 11, verse 4. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids try the children of men. And so here we see the temple is synonymous with the Lord's throne. And obviously this is where you had the presence of God above the ark of the mercy seat. And so it's described as the throne of God. Jeremiah 17, verse 2. This one's even more obvious. While their children remember their altars. Okay, that's definitely not the verse I'm looking for. Verse 12, excuse me. A glorious high throne from the beginning is the place of our sanctuary. And so we see again the high throne, the place of our sanctuary. Okay, Psalms 132. Again, we see this imagery so many places. In verse 7, we will go into his tabernacle. We will worship at his footstool. And remember, Jesus in Matthew 5 said he equated the footstool with earth. Again, he's not talking about the physical earth. He's talking about this temple that is being described. If we go over to 1 Chronicles, David, 1 Chronicles 28, David says something very interesting. He says, then David, the king, stood up upon his feet and said, hear me, my brethren and my people. As for me, I had in my heart to build a house of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and for the footstool of our God, and had made ready the building. And so again we see the temple, that system. David was trying to build this house, which was a footstool for our God. Lamentations, this one is really good, because Jerusalem has just been destroyed by Babylon, and we're going to see something really profound here. We see the casting down from heaven to earth, and we see this same imagery in Revelation chapter 12 as well. The Lord hath swallowed up all the habitations of Jacob, hath not pitied. He hath thrown down in his wrath the strongholds of the daughter of Judah, and hath brought them down to the ground, had polluted the kingdom and the princes thereof. And, okay, I was actually looking for verse 1. How hath the Lord covered the daughter of Zion with the cloud in his anger, and cast down from heaven to the earth the beauty of Israel, and remembered not his footstool in the day of his anger. So here we see that the footstool, that temple system, was cast down from heaven to earth, meaning in totality, all of it, right? This heaven and earth is synonymous with the footstool. And we've seen that. I think I've demonstrated that throughout all these texts. Interestingly enough, and I want to go back to Matthew 23, because Jesus, again, think broad, like take a step back, think about the context. And I pointed this out in Matthew chapter 7 at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. There's two houses there. One is going to fall, the house built on sand. The other one is the house built on the rock, Jesus. And so we have this one physical house and this other spiritual house. One will fall, the house of sand. And that's precisely what we see in Matthew chapter 24. What we see here in Matthew chapter 23. He is rebuking the Pharisees. And they had been swearing by the things that go inside the temple. The gold, saying it's more important. In Matthew chapter 23, Jesus rebukes him. He says, whoever shall swear by the temple swears by it and by him that dwell therein. And he that shall swear by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him that sitteth thereon. And so this is, again, Hebrew parallelism, swearing by the temple, by him that dwells in it, and he that is synonymous with saying he that swears by heaven, by the throne of God, and him that sitteth thereon. So these are two synonymous statements that Jesus is saying. If we go over to the very next chapter, which I think, if you just think of this as like, Jesus now all of a sudden saying heaven and earth will pass away. It's like, where are you getting that from, Jesus? Because the context of the whole chapter is the passing away of the temple. And we know this happened in 70 AD. See, he says, the disciples ask him, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age, not the end of the world? He even says, in the prior verse, there will be not one stone here left upon another. He's speaking about the temple system. Now, if we drop down to, I believe it is, let me find it, verse 35. Remember, he's describing the fall of the temple, and he says, this generation shall not pass till all these things take place. Again, he's speaking to the generation in front of him. That would take place 40 years later. That was one generation. He says, heaven and earth will pass away. What is heaven and earth? We've already shown that is the temple system, the old covenant system. He says, but my words will never pass away. Which is precisely, again, going back to Matthew 5, what he says. He is speaking to them, and he says in verse 18, speaking about the old covenant, he says, think not I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. So this is the old covenant, law, prophets. He says, I didn't come to destroy it. I came to completely fill it up, fulfill it. He says, verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass. Again, this is the old covenant system of worship, that temple system that was central to the old covenant. He says, until it passes, heaven and earth, not one jot or one tittle will in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. And so the law, the heaven and earth, the temple will pass away. The jots and tittles will be set aside. And he says, whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments, which is again, going back to Matthew 24, these are his words. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So I hope you can see the perfect harmony, Old Testament, and Jesus using the language of the Old Testament and of course, right, he's the inspiration behind, right, the writer's words. And so that's exactly what we see. Him hearkening back to the same language used throughout the Old Testament to depict almost this cosmic language to describe the fall of that old covenant system, to give rise to the new creation in Christ that we all become when we accept him by faith. And so I hope this was clear. Definitely leave me some feedback, some comments. I appreciate you guys watching. If you enjoyed this video, take a minute to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, thank you and God bless.